Tonight we have a very special guest, Taylor Dahl. She's a Bears fan from Jacksonville that covers the Jaguars. So, how are you tonight, Taylor?
Hey, I'm good. I appreciate you guys having me on.
Yeah, thanks for finding the time to come on with us and talking to the Bears with us. But why don't you let everybody know where they can find you, what your content is, and everything like that? I know you're a part of Second City Gridiron, but yeah, you'll probably lay it out there better than I can. So.
Yeah, so you'll find me on Twitter. It's at Taydal1010XL. The 1010XL part is because I do cover the Jaguars here in Jacksonville. So I do split my time. It's half Jags content, half Bears content. But I do podcasts for Second City Gridiron / Windy City. It used to be Windy City Gridiron. We kind of transformed to Second City Gridiron. And so I have a podcast on there called Making Monsters. The gist of it kind of started to where I was getting to know players kind of beyond the football field. So I still do those every now and then where I'll get dads, sisters, brothers, former coaches, high school coaches, college coaches, stuff like that on to talk about the players and kind of how they got into football, how they got into the NFL and stuff like that. So I do have a lot of breakdowns on players with that. Like if you want to learn more about a Jaquan Brisker or a Jalen Johnson or any of those guys, I do have episodes out on a lot of the players still. During the season, I do all of our preview shows. So before every game, you'll see me kind of break down with an opposing reporter or opposing former player, something like that, where we'll break down the matchup and what to expect. The off season for me, though, is like the most fun because I just kind of get to do what I want to do. And so right now I'm doing a coaching series. We're getting to know all of the coaches. I've done one on Ben Johnson already. I had one drop on Saturday on Dennis Allen and Al Harris. It was a really good one. If people want to learn a little bit more about those two guys, swing by because it was really in depth about Dennis Allen and how the Bears already have players to fit his defense, what to expect from his defenses, what Al Harris can bring. And then it was a Saints guy, obviously. So he really went into the Declan Doyle too, because Declan Doyle was in New Orleans for a little bit. And so we talked a lot, all of those guys a little bit, and it's fun. So this time of year, I kind of just get to like do what I want to do. And that's the fun part.
Yeah, awesome. A lot of content right there, a lot of good stuff. I wanted to specifically ask you, since you've been, focusing on the Jaguars a little bit and whatnot, about the one guy that's probably not a big fan favorite amongst the fan base, and that would be Press Taylor. Yeah. So what can you tell us about him from your experiences?
Yeah.
There in Jacksonville. I got to do it.
I know. I know.
Sorry, I had to get it out of the way. I just had to.
It's hilarious. I get embarrassed every time I watch that video. So Press Taylor, I will start by saying I immediately tweeted and was like, oh no, because I'm not a Press Taylor fan, but I do have to say the reason of that is he's been the offensive coordinator here in Jacksonville. So obviously that's a little bit different. Like we have a very different experience with Press Taylor in Jacksonville than what the Bears will have. They play Kansas City and they take Kansas City, honestly, to the whim and almost end up upsetting Kansas City. And as that was all going on, everyone at that time was under the impression that Doug Peterson was the play caller, but in second halves of games, Press Taylor would take over. And so it was a weird concept of why, first of all, why are these two guys like splitting play calling in certain areas? And to me, I was like, it would make sense if maybe they're like, okay, the third down play calls are Press Taylor, or maybe just like fourth quarter when you need, if you're down by 10, if you're up by 10, Press Taylor. It was just, we were told first half of games was Doug Peterson, second half of games was Press Taylor. And so everyone already thought that was weird, but the second half of games was when a lot of the Jaguars, they'd be down, and then in the second half they'd come back and rally and win games. So people were like, oh, okay, well, Press Taylor must be a good play caller, because anytime you need these clutch moments from Trevor, it was apparent that it was Press Taylor who was involved in that. So then as time goes, you go back and in 2023, things kind of fell apart. Obviously, the Jags start 8-3. They end up losing the final, I think like 6 of 7 or whatever it was at the end of the season, end up missing the playoffs because of that. Trevor Lawrence is battling a bunch of injuries, but you also saw just like a true regression of the offense as a whole. You were seeing Trevor get worse. He was turning the ball over a ton, fumbling a ton. Some of people were factoring in like maybe it's just these injuries, maybe he's not 100%. And so you were still trying to figure out what exactly was going on, because in the start of this season, when they started 8-3, it wasn't pretty. It wasn't like you were watching this high-powered offense to where you felt like they were unstoppable, but they were coming out and winning games and winning close games that you were like, okay, this must be good enough. Like that you can get by with this. So it ended up falling apart. That's when people started asking questions. Are we still doing this split Doug Peterson, Press Taylor thing, or is Doug fully taking over? And they just would never tell us. So this whole last off season, it was this big conspiracy of who was going to call plays this year. You'd even ask Trevor Lawrence, and Trevor would kind of be like, I don't know. Like, we haven't really talked about it. Well, like, we'll know once the season starts. And then the season started, and every time you would ask Doug or Press, it was very like pushed to the side, almost like it doesn't matter who's calling plays, or we have our system of who's calling plays, and it's it's working, but it wasn't working. So people at that point started getting frustrated. And I think that if you have a situation where you're not really answering, but it's working, people won't press you on it. But if it's not working, if your offense is looking bad, and it truly was starting to look like Trevor Lawrence was getting worse, which is a concern. You spend a first overall pick. He also just got a contract this last summer, by the way, to make him tied with Joe Burrow for the highest paid quarterback in the league. And you're seeing this guy get worse, and you're seeing him scared in the pocket. Like, he was running from like invisible pressure at certain points of the year. He was turning the ball over again, making really bad decisions, overthrowing people. And that's when people started looking at Press Taylor. Like, okay, well, if you guys won't tell us who's actually calling plays, then we're going to assume what was happening in the previous years, which was that in the second half of games, it was Press Taylor. And in the second halves of games, Jaguars were completely collapsing, and Trevor Lawrence was not looking good. So we're going to blame you then. So it's kind of been a very weird situation when it comes to what it was. And like I said, there's rumors also that Doug Peterson, the reason he even got fired from Philly, was also Press Taylor. So now he just got fired from his second job because of Press Taylor. And it's alarming to me. So
yeah, I got to say, it is kind of refreshing to hear the dysfunction somewhere else. I'm just like, oh yeah, I know that. I've heard something that crazy before over here.
Yeah.
It's just nice to hear that it also happens in other places.
It sounds like a lot of the things that me and Paulie always kind of mention about the Bears. It's a combination of two guys trying to be the smartest guys in the room and just kind of outsmarting everybody. And we know better, and like, just be straightforward, man. Like, sometimes it's easier to be simple. And then also a little bit of too many cooks in the kitchen. Right. So, I guess if we're talking Press Taylor though, and like kind of the Jaguars, cause we watched, some Jags football, we like to watch general football, but much more. The only thing I really know about Press Taylor is like he's brothers with Zach Taylor, and obviously they're going to have some bones to their offenses that are similar. And then knowing what I know about Doug Peterson, what would you like describe as the tenets, or even something as what are the characteristics of like a Press Taylor and Doug Peterson offense, and how that's going to kind of, maybe even if he has a little bit of influence here, like what does that look like more, with Evan Ingram being like an off-ball tight end and maybe 3 wide receivers, or like a single back, any fullback kind of stuff? Like, what do you know about that offense that he enjoys to run?
Yeah, and I think that it depends when you're asking. If we go back to the end of 2022, beginning of 2023, I would say I would explain it completely different than what I would have within this last year and a half. And so it looked very different. And that's what also people were trying to figure out of the play calling side, because it did look like very different offenses between those two times. Some of it is personnel. We know that, like, you do have a Christian Kirk and an Evan Ingram, but Christian Kirk gets hurt. And so you're going to have to kind of change things around that. There was a lot of weirdness kind of going on, a lot of injuries happening. So things did shift a little bit. But what I will say is, one of the things they really do like to use, they like to use the running backs. And when the offense worked in 2022, Travis Etienne was a massive focal point in what they did offensively. And they used him everywhere. They used him running up the middle. They used him, going out on the outside. They used him in the passing game. They used him all over the place. And that was one of the things that worked so well in 2022. And one of the things that they steered away from this last year and a half, that people were wondering why, because they also get a running back in Tank Bigsby, and Tank Bigsby, who has some fumbling issues when he has the ball in his hands, is really good at forcing missed tackles and getting those yards after contact and stuff like that. And so we thought coming into the season that it was going to be kind of what Detroit did, where with Monty and with Jahmyr Gibbs, in this world of you have two different style backs. And so we were hoping that you would see both of these backs used differently, and it being able to work in a positive light offensively. For some reason, Doug and Press could not get that to work, but they wanted to. And you could tell, because they never fully abandoned the run game. They tried to keep making it work, but it just, for some reason, was not. I personally think some of that is the offensive line. The Jags offensive line struggled a lot in the interior. And as Bears fans know, It's hard to run the ball behind the middle of the offensive line if nobody's blocking anybody. So that was kind of some of the issues here too. But when it comes to Press Taylor and what he does passing game wise and with what he did with Trevor Lawrence, some of what we did like is it was a lot of downfield stuff. And I think that what Evan Ingram and Christian Kirk were able to do in the slot, like Evan, I think was more that like midfield slot guy that they used him as that. I always say he's more of a receiving tight end, like he's more of that pass catching tight end. He's not that big, bulky Travis Kelce type of tight end. So they did use him more as a wide receiver type, which I did think benefited them because they had a guy like Christian Kirk and Evan Ingram who they could both use in these wide receiver roles, and they could use them in the mid intermediate, but then also Christian Kirk could go deep because he was fast. And so they did like Trevor Lawrence to get the ball downfield. And that was a massive part of what happened at the end of 2022. Both Evan Ingram and Christian Kirk had career years that first year in 2022 when it came to the receptions they had, when it came to yards, when it comes to touchdowns. Both of them, all three, set their career years with that. And because a lot of it was Trevor pressing the ball down the field. And so I do think that teams maybe caught up to that a little bit once they got into that next year. They kind of knew that that's what Trevor could do. And Trevor struggled with short passes a little bit more. I don't know what it is, but if it's like less than 12 for some reason, Trevor's overthrowing people. So they like to stretch the field. They like to do that type of stuff. That's why they draft a guy like Brian Thomas Jr. So you're going into the season and you're like, okay, now you have BTJ and you have Gabe Davis, who ended up being an absolute bust this season. But you had these guys that could stretch the field and benefit what Press Taylor likes to do, which is just that. He likes to get the ball. He doesn't really like the short stuff. If they are running screen passes, they're not working. It's usually like the weird bubble screens that go nowhere. And so it didn't work here in Jacksonville. So a lot of it is, and what I would say, which I think Bears fans would be pleased to hear, because I do think they would like to see a little bit more deep ball accuracy and a little more deep balls with Caleb Williams, because that was just something that he struggled with a bit last year. There was a lot of inaccuracy when it came to his deep passes. And then you'd see moments where you're like, it's there somewhere. Somebody just has to bring it out. So if I could pull any positive out of that, I will say that Press Taylor being around Trevor, that was one of the things that they really did push and draw out of Trevor Lawrence, is being comfortable in getting those passes 30 plus yards down the field.
It's interesting, that whole quarterback class. I mean, Trevor Lawrence was the last one hanging on, and he got paid. He was the only one that got paid out of all five that went in the first round. And it was just kind of, a little sad to see him just collapse the way it did, especially because once you do get paid, you have to live up to the value of that contract. Yeah. David, I don't know if you had some thoughts on that anymore. I still wanted to ask you about Bieniemy, because I haven't even gotten your thoughts on the Bieniemy hire.
Just one more question, I guess, with like Press Taylor. This could be quick because I'm just genuinely curious about, again, like the bones of it all and how that translates to like the Bears. So with Evan Ingram being such a different type of pass, like catching tight end, was Press Taylor's offense, do you guys have any fullbacks in the last 2-3 years? Was there ever any like big packages going on with Evan Ingram kind of being on the opposite side of a run and the backup tight end blocking on the outside? Or is it was just so, light boxed kind of, we're going to spread you out, and then if we do run it, it's because you have a light box kind of thing?
Yeah, they had no fullback. They did this last year. They drafted another tight end, not this last, in 2023, Brenton Strange. Brenton Strange took a way bigger role this year, and Brenton Strange is a bigger, more blocking style tight end. He'll block, but he will also. Evan Ingram, battling injuries, came in and stepped in for him and played well also. And so, but it was a very predictable offense, to the point that that's even the word Shad Khan used after the season when they were explaining why they didn't initially fired Trent Baalke, and his reasonings were he felt it was more the coaching, and that the coaching was very predictable when it came into end game and to the actual in-game situations. And so it wasn't anything that people couldn't figure out. And I think that's what was so frustrating with watching it, because when you were seeing this team, especially this year, like I said, when you have Christian Kirk and Evan Ingram coming not far off of some of their best seasons, and then you have a Travis Etienne who also had one of the best years too. He obviously missed his whole first year to injury. After that, was one of the best running backs in the league. And then you add Brian Thomas Jr. and you add Gabe Davis and Brenton Strange second year. and you have all of these things. And they did add pieces. They added a center in Mitch Morse from Buffalo. And so they did add all these pieces, and for everybody was like, okay, now you have everything. You have all the personnel to do that type of stuff that you're talking about, where you're maybe a little more to tight end setups. I'm hoping the Jags do that this year, but you barely saw it at all this year. It was nothing. It was very predictable offenses and nothing crazy. And like I said, it could have all been Doug. Nobody will tell us anything. So it could have been Doug Peterson doing all of this. And we'll never know, I don't think.
It's funny because I think we went through the same thing even maybe last year with more so Luke Getsy than Shane Waldron, where sometimes we were just like, man, this stuff isn't working. And the stuff that's working is the stuff you refuse to try to run, where it's just just run big packages out there, line up a fullback and 2 tight ends and just, roll out. Like, this is more Justin Fields time, but I guess that's just kind of neither here nor there. I was going to lead to this, Paulie, so that's perfect that you pulled that up. So I feel like there's a few teams in the NFL that always share like the nucleuses, right? And then there's always just connections. Like right now I can think of Bears. We're a Bears show, obviously. Yeah. Atlanta is always picking up our scraps. And right now I think
some Kansas City ties.
Some Kansas City ties, obviously, with Ryan Poles and stuff. And there's some Eagles ties, not so much with Ian Cunningham, but like, I think the Bears and the Jags are starting to kind of meet on a path. And then their similarities are starting to get really close. Like, we were this close to having the Bears instead of, like Duval. So like,
but the DJ Moore trade was huge. I'm sorry, that was the Panthers. My bad.
Right. So I'm just saying,
I get those cat teams mixed up sometimes.
Those, we were, Paulie, I hate to say it, if Ben Johnson really liked Jacksonville. So insider wise, from where we were at,
we have breaking news from Thigh that they did request to interview him about 45 minutes ago. I did double check.
Yeah. So like talking about those connections and stuff, how do you feel about Ian Cunningham? Do you feel like Shad Khan and that ownership, are they doing this the right way? Are they kind of taking a Bears playbook and doing this ass backwards and hiring a coach first, then getting him a GM, then, a quarterback on different timelines? Like, are we, the parallels are starting to get a little obnoxious. How do you feel about like Ian Cunningham coming over?
Yeah, unfortunately I go back to like 2017 all the time and start drawing. The parallels started to be drawn there with the way that things happen, because obviously the Jags built this defense that was really good. They had this mediocre quarterback. They go to the AFC Championship. Then this next year they completely fall apart. And then the Bears do that in 2018. The Bears have this defense that helps Mitch Trubisky, this mediocre quarterback, go into the playoffs, and then everything next year it falls apart. And then
random parallel thought. Trevor Lawrence, Justin Fields at the same time.
Yeah, same.
Just throwing that out, and they're
there's a lot
rivals.
Yeah, there's a lot of like drawn parallels that I've had to, as I'm covering both teams, have kind of been like, okay, well, like the Bears have done this, and now the Jags have done this, and neither have worked. So I don't know why either team is copying the other one in certain situations. But when it comes to Ian Cunningham, I love Ian Cunningham. I know people have completely turned on Ryan Poles and have been very anti Ryan Poles for a long time. I'm still full on in support of Ryan Poles. And I also do love Ian Cunningham. And I do think in this situation, it's a win-win I do think he will be a great general manager. And I think it's a good choice for the Jacksonville Jaguars. You also get 2 third-round picks from the league. If you're the Bears for it, you get those comp picks. So that's beneficial when it comes to that. So I do think in that light, it's a win-win. I will say that from people I've talked to in the Bears world of things, Ian Cunningham is a little hesitant because he wants it to be the right kind of like order, the order of the way that the pecking order of how things are handled in the front office, just because obviously we've heard some things about what exactly was going on with Kevin Warren and Ryan Poles, and was there a little bit of clash into that in these last couple of years? Was McCaskey getting involved in that? And when you have that many hands in the cookie jar, sometimes it gets a little messy. And so the Jags just announced today too that they were hiring Tony Baselli as their EVP. So they just added another name in this cookie jar too, who I do think he's going to be a big part in this general manager hire and who they bring in, because he was a big part of them ending up getting Liam Cohen.
Sorry, would you say Tony Baselli or?
Yeah, Tony Baselli.
Yeah.
But I will say, and I've been very vocal about this on my show, I think the Jags have done everything ass backwards since the season ended. I mean, it was Trent Baalke has been a known cancer in the league for a long time. And you can go back and look at my tweets 2-3 years ago. And even at that time, I was saying, we gotta fire this guy. He's awful. His drafts suck. His free agencies are even worse. He's had like one good free agency where people think that was something to like hang your hat on. For the most part, he'll hit on like 1 or 2 draft picks a year. And like one of the years he had 13 draft picks, and you talk about like 2 of them now. He also, just in general, when it comes to coaching hires, in his time between San Francisco and Jacksonville, 6 head coaches have gotten fired under Trent Baalke. And to me, that's a red flag. Like, there, at some point, we got to figure out the common denominator here. And so it was weird that he didn't, right after the season, fire both Doug Peterson and Trent Baalke. Obviously that ended up changing, but at that point it was 2 weeks later and you lost out on Ben Johnson. It's been a very stated thing that I said this back in November. I heard people from Detroit that said Ben Johnson would not come to Jacksonville if Trent Baalke was here. Shad Khan, if I'm hearing that, Shad Khan's heard that. So he didn't fire him. And then at that point you lose Ben Johnson to the Bears. And now you kind of have to rush things. And I think the kind of thing that made them push the button and change things was Liam Cohen came here and did an interview. And this isn't a for sure thing, but from what it sounds like is he was pretty much like, I'm not working with Trent Baalke, so I'm going to go back and keep my offensive coordinating job in Tampa. And that embarrassed Shad, because now you're sitting there, someone's taking a demotion to not come work for your franchise because of a person that is there still in the building. And the next day, Trent Baalke was fired. But now you're 2 weeks late. You're 2 weeks late to all the hirings. And now here they are. They don't even have a general manager. They have 25 days to get one, because if they don't have one by February 28th, they can't get one until after the draft. So now you're rushed into this process also of finding a GM, filling the rest of the staff. Oh, by the way, the combine is that week too. So you're now having to start worrying about going to this combine and starting to worry about free agency. That's a week and a half, 2 weeks later. So now they're just behind at this point. And so I think they did everything the wrong way. I've liked what they've done since. It's not like I've really hated anything. I actually do like Liam Cohen. I like that hire. He was third on my list of people when I was kind of like, here's the 3 coaches that I'd be okay with the Bears or the Jags hiring. He was on that list. But I do think that someone like Ian Cunningham would be good for Jacksonville, just because I do like all of his involvement. And when it comes in the things that I have heard he's had a say in Chicago. And I think they need somebody here that does have that more true football mind and the / business, though, because Tony Baselli's a football player. Tony Baselli's been in the media. He's a great man and he means a lot to this organization, but he doesn't have that experience in the front office that you would hope. So someone like Ian Cunningham would bring that. And now you've just worked with a lot of when you're working with someone like Ryan Poles, who's coming from the Kansas City organization, and someone like Kevin Warren, you're learning a lot in those situations. And so in the college world and in the NFL world. So I do think it'll be beneficial for both. It'll be interesting. I think they requested 4 different guys to hire for the general manager. So we'll see where that ends up playing out. But
yeah, it's interesting. I kind of wish I was a fly on the wall sometimes, and you could hear some of these conversations and know some things that we don't know and can only speculate on. But one of the things that we brought up was exactly the same situation you mentioned. Would keeping Ryan Poles potentially disqualify some head coaches from wanting to come here if they wanted to bring their own GM? Because, at the time, he had done, there's been some ups and there's been some downs. So you can make a case for either or. And so if it's going to cost you, for example, a Ben Johnson, is it worth it? And luckily we were, able to still get Ben Johnson and retain Ryan Poles. And now Ryan Poles gets all the credit. And I know Thai was telling us that there's a talk about extending him for the same type of timeline as Ben Johnson, which would make sense. But it's just kind of funny how, you're so close to that situation. But I do think you guys would be getting a good front office guy with Ian Cunningham. I can even go back to, I don't know if it was in Hard Knocks. It was at some point during the offseason. I remember when they wanted to trade up for Roma Dunze. Ian Cunningham was
calm down.
Chill out. Let it fall to you. Let it be right. And so,
it worries me, honestly, because I think Ryan Poles gets a little emotional when you're talking about even Hard Knocks and how much he wants to keep Ian Wheeler and how much he's crying his eyes out for who's the backup safety, Paulie? Help me out. Not Adrian something, I think.
Colbert.
Yeah.
Adrian Colbert, right? And then he's going to get emotional about going up and going to grab Rome. And if Ian Cunningham is the like sound logical guy, and Tony Baselli, if I'm not mistaken, was like 9-time All-Pro in all 9 years he played or something like that.
Yeah.
He's a lunatic. So you got your football brain there, plus your Ian Cunningham being kind of the calming voice in the room.